Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something I think, well, everyone wonders about at some point. How do we actually learn things effectively?
Yeah, how do we make it stick?
Exactly. We're diving into the science, drawing heavily from the book, Make It Stick.
Great resource. Lots of solid research in there.
Definitely. And you, our listener, you're probably here because you want to learn efficiently, really understand things, and not just, get bogged down rereading stuff that doesn't sink in.
Right. We want that real, durable learning.
So our mission today is to pull out those practical strategies, the ones that maybe even seem a bit surprising that help knowledge last.
Strategies backed by cognitive science.
Thinking back, my own study habits involved a lot of highlighting. Felt productive.
Oh, yeah. The whole page yellow.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But was it actually helping? Let's unpack what the science says.
Okay. Well, a fascinating place to start is how easily we fool ourselves. The book calls it the illusion of knowing.
The illusion of knowing. Tell me more.
It's that feeling you get when you reread something. It feels familiar, comfortable.
Right. Like, oh yeah, I remember seeing this.
Exactly. And you mistake that familiarity for actual mastery. You think you know it.
But you don't necessarily. And the book points out that our usual methods, like that rereading I mentioned, or cramming, they call it massed practice.
Doing it all at once.
Yeah, those are apparently among the least productive ways to learn. That really surprised me.
It's super counterintuitive, isn't it? Because rereading feels easy, but the book makes this great point. Learning is deeper and more durable when it's effortful.
Effortful, okay.
Learning that's easy is like writing in sand, here today and gone tomorrow.
Wow, okay, so why does that illusion happen? Why does easy feel right?
Well, think about how our brain works. Simplified, maybe think System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, based on recognition.
Like recognizing a face.
Exactly. System 2 is slower, analytical, more effortful, like solving a math problem. Rereading often just triggers that fast System 1 recognition. Feels good, feels like knowing.
But it doesn't engage the deeper System 2 processing needed for real learning.
Precisely. You get the aha of recognition, but not the click of deep understanding.
Okay, so if just reading and highlighting isn't the answer, what is effective? The book kept mentioning retrieval practice.
Yes. This is maybe the biggest takeaway for me. Retrieval practice. Basically testing yourself.
Testing yourself, like quizzes.
Quizzes, flashcards, even just closing the book and trying to recall the main points. Actively pulling the information out of your memory.
Okay, so it's not just for assessment, like finding out your grade.
Not at all. It's a learning tool in itself. A very powerful one. The act of retrieving information strengthens the memory.
Right. The quote was something like, retrieval practice is a more effective learning strategy than review by rereading. That seems key.
It really is. Every time you pull that fact or concept out, you're making that memory pathway stronger and more accessible for later. You're telling your brain, hey, this is important.
It interrupts forgetting too, right?
Definitely. And it helps you pinpoint what you don't know yet. Those gaps in your knowledge become really obvious when you try to retrieve.
So simple things like flashcards or just summarizing a chapter from memory.
Those are perfect examples. And interestingly, the book mentions that using low-stakes quizzes in classrooms actually improves student attitudes and even attendance. It makes learning more active.
That motivational aspect is interesting too.
It is, and cognitively, what's happening is pretty cool. When you retrieve a memory, it temporarily becomes sort of changeable again, malleable.
Really?
Yeah, before it gets stored again, reconsolidated. And that process actually allows you to weave in new connections and make the original memory stronger, more resistant to forgetting.
So retrieval isn't just finding the file. It's like saving a new, improved version of it.
That's a great way to put it. You're actively reconstructing the knowledge.
Okay, retrieval practice makes sense. Now, another big idea was about mixing things up. Spacing and interleaving. What's that about?
Right. So most of us, when we learn something, we tend to cram. Focus intensely on one topic or skill for a block of time. That's massed practice.
Like studying only Chapter 3 the night before the test on Chapter 3.
Exactly. And it might feel like you're learning fast. You get good quickly in that session. But for long-term memory, the research clearly shows spaced practice is much better.
Spaced practice, meaning?
Spreading your study sessions out over time. Instead of one 3-hour block, maybe 3 one-hour blocks spread over a few days or weeks.
Okay, that feels more intuitive, letting it sink in.
Yeah, but it often feels harder. When you come back to the material after a break, you've forgotten a bit. You have to work harder to retrieve it.
Ah, so that effort is actually part of the benefit.
That's the key. That effortful retrieval during space practice is what really cements the learning long term. Then there's interleaving.
Interleaving, okay. What's that?
That's mixing up the practice of different, though usually related, skills or subjects within a single study session.
So instead of doing all my math problems, then all my physics problems.
You'd mix them up, do a math problem, then a physics problem, then another math problem, maybe a chemistry concept.
That sounds like it would feel really disjointed, maybe even less productive.
It absolutely feels less productive in the moment. The book says exactly that. Retrieval is harder and feels less productive, but the effort produces longer-lasting learning.
Why? Why does mixing it up help?
It forces your brain to constantly retrieve different concepts or problem-solving methods. You can't just stay in one groove. You have to discriminate between types of problems and figure out which solution applies.
Ah, so it helps you learn which tool to use, not just how to use one tool over and over.
Precisely. Think about learning tennis strokes. If you practice only forehands for an hour, then only backhands. You get good at each in isolation,
Okay.
but in a real game, the ball comes at you differently each time. You need to recognize forehand situation or backhand situation and switch fluidly. Interleaving practice helps build that adaptability.
That's a great analogy. So massed practice gives you that quick feeling of mastery.
What researchers call momentary strength.
But spacing and interleaving build the real lasting skill.
The underlying habit strength. Exactly. It builds flexibility.
Okay, so embracing that feeling of difficulties seems to be a theme, which leads to another point in the book. Embracing difficulties and even making mistakes. That feels wrong somehow.
It does, doesn't it? We're often taught that mistakes are bad, that learning should be smooth.
Yeah, avoid errors at all costs.
But the book argues the opposite. When learning is harder, it's stronger and lasts longer. Difficulty is desirable, in a way.
How so? Give me an example.
Okay, one fascinating finding is about trying to solve a problem before you're shown the solution.
Just jumping in blind?
Sort of.
Uh.
Even if you make errors or you can't solve it completely, that initial struggle actually helps you learn the solution more deeply once it's explained.
Really, even if you get it wrong. The book said, trying to solve a problem before being taught the solution leads to better learning, even when errors are made in the attempt.
Exactly. That initial effort primes your brain. You're engaged, you're generating possibilities, you're grappling with the underlying concepts. Then when you get the answer, it slots in much more meaningfully. And the mistakes themselves. They aren't failures, they're information, especially if you get feedback. A mistake highlights a misunderstanding. Correcting it with effort strengthens the right connections in your brain.
So confusion isn't a sign you're bad at learning. It's part of the process.
A necessary part,
Yeah.
often. It's the effortful part that makes learning stick.
That really changes how you might approach, say, a tough chapter in a textbook. Don't just passively read, try to predict, try to answer questions first.
Exactly. Engage with it actively, even if it feels hard. Now, after you've done that retrieval, that space practice, that grappling, what comes next is also crucial.
Which is?
Reflection and elaboration.
Okay, reflection. The book described it as this kind of active mental replay, right?
Yeah, it's more than just daydreaming. It's specific cognitive work, as they put it. Reflection can involve several cognitive activities: retrieving knowledge, connecting these to new experiences, and visualizing and mentally rehearsing what you might do differently next time.
So thinking back on what you learned, how it connects to other things, and,
Yeah,
maybe how you could apply it.
you got it. It's about consolidating and integrating the learning, making it your own.
And elaboration, how's that different?
Elaboration is about adding layers of meaning. The book defines it as the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words and connecting it with what you already know.
Ah, so explaining it to yourself or someone else.
Yes, or finding analogies, relating it to your own life experiences, thinking about how it relates to concepts you learned last week. The more connections you build.
The more mental pathways you have to find that information later.
Exactly. You're building a richer mental model. The book notes that people who are good at extracting key ideas and organizing them into these models, connecting them to prior knowledge, have a real advantage in learning complex stuff.
So it's not just collecting facts, it's building a web of understanding.
Right.
Like if I was learning about, say, different investment strategies, I wouldn't just memorize definitions.
Right. You'd think about how they compare, which situations they apply to, maybe how they relate to your own financial goals.
Connecting it to what I already care about.
That's perfect elaboration. It makes the learning meaningful and memorable.
Okay, this leads nicely into the final theme, which is really about us, the learner, taking charge.
Absolutely. It's not just about techniques, it's about mindset and approach. Setting goals, actively seeking out experiences.
The book mentioned two interesting concepts here: rule learning and structure building. You break those down a bit.
Sure, think about rule learners. They're people who, when they encounter something new, they try to figure out the underlying principle or rule. As the book says, people who, as a matter of habit, extract underlying principles or rules are more successful learners than those who take their experiences at face value. They're looking for the why or the how it works beneath the surface.
So they can apply it more broadly later.
Exactly. And structure builders are similar. They actively try to organize new information into a coherent mental framework. They see how the pieces fit together to form a bigger picture.
It's about actively making sense of things, not just passively receiving them.
Precisely. And the book also mentions dynamic testing as part of this proactive approach.
Dynamic testing.
It's basically using testing as an ongoing guide for your learning. You test yourself, see where the gaps are, focus your study on those weak spots, then test again. It's a continuous cycle of diagnosis and focused effort.
Like a personal learning feedback loop.
You got it. And interestingly, tied into this idea of active learning, the book kind of downplays something we often fixate on: learning styles.
Oh yeah, like visual learner, auditory learner.
Right. The book argues, and the research seems to back this up pretty strongly, that while we might prefer certain ways of learning, the active strategies we use matter far more than our supposed style.
So whether I think I'm a visual learner or not, things like retrieval practice and spacing are still the most effective methods.
That's the message. As they say, differences we may think count for a lot, for example, having a verbal or visual learning style, actually don't. What does count is engaging actively with the material using these proven strategies.
It really comes back to effortful engagement.
It does, and the empowering part is that the book really emphasizes our own agency. It concludes that the power to increase your abilities lies largely within your own control. Our brains are plastic, we can improve how we learn.
That's a hopeful message. So, okay, let's try to summarize the big takeaways from this deep dive into Make It Stick.
Definitely. Number one, I'd say, is retrieval practice. Testing yourself is learning, not just assessment.
Right. And then there's spacing and interleaving. Don't cram, spread it out, and mix it up for durable learning.
Also, embrace difficulty. Struggling a bit, making mistakes, and learning from them that's actually productive.
Yeah, that effort signals importance to the brain. And finally, actively process what you learn through reflection and elaboration. Connect it, make it meaningful.
Couldn't have said it better. It's about being an active, engaged learner.
And realizing that the methods that feel easiest, like rereading, often aren't the ones that work best long-term. It's a bit counterintuitive.
Very much so. The most effective strategies often require more mental effort up front.
So for you listening, as you tackle your next learning challenge, maybe it's a work project, a hobby, studying something new, think about this.
Yeah.
Now that you know the science, how might you approach it differently?
Yeah, maybe pick just one thing. Will you try spacing out your practice? Build in some self-quizzing.
Try explaining the concept in your own words to see if you really get it. We encourage you to experiment, see what happens when you apply one of these ideas.
We really hope this deep dive has given you some practical tools and insights for your own learning journey.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.